president, for governor, and our direct democracy elections all give equal weight to anyone who actually shows up at the polls, right? They represent each voter equally, right? So legislatures represent residents, executive and direct democracy elections represent voters. And I'm going to show you a picture that sort of spells out the implications of this. But we know from research that voters are richer, whiter, and more conservative than the residents as a whole, because there are many people who are ineligible to vote because they're not citizens, they're not here illegally, they're too young, and those populations tend to be younger, more likely to be members of minority groups, far more likely to be immigrants, and generally more politically liberal. Right? So we have these two competing constituencies that are both represented by different branches of government, right? And in the tiebreaker, direct democracy. So direct democracy is the system that we have in about half of American states. An idea from Athens, borrowed by way of Switzerland, where we can do things like the initiative, where voters can directly propose legislation, the referendum, where voters can vote down a bill passed by the legislature, and the recall, where voters can replace their governor with a bodybuilder of their choosing. All three of these systems, right, are ones that give an advantage to voters over residents. And some research done by my colleagues at Heinau shows that in direct democracy elections, the minority voters are very often on the losing end of these initiative, referendum, and recall elections. And it also helps explain why California is really a red state in our gubernatorial elections. Republicans have won 6 of the last 8 gubernatorial elections in California when they're representing the constituency of richer, older, and whiter, more conservative voters. Whereas our legislature, Democrats hold 51 to 29 advantage in our lower house and a 26 to 14 advantage in our Senate. So the blue state in its legislature, a red state in its governorship. Now, how do immigrants exacerbate this? Well, in areas where immigrants are densely populated, right? Many of those immigrants are ineligible to vote, and many of the other populations around them are ineligible to vote. And so these are the districts that are especially, that may capture legislative seats, but lose out in executive and direct democracy elections. So let me illustrate this by showing a tale of 2 districts in 2008. So these are California State Assembly districts in the Los Angeles area. So here's the Pacific Ocean, Santa Monica, Malibu. Downtown LA is about here. This is the 46th district. It was won by John Perez, a Latino, and it had about 60,000 voters turn out in 2008. 60,000 voters. This is an area where, so the black dots tell you the percentage of non-citizens in each of these census tracts, right? It's very large. So there are lots of people who are not citizens and thus ineligible to vote in California elections. That's why this turnout is so low. And the darker shaded areas tell you which of these areas have the most immigrants, right? And you see clearly across the political map of California that the areas with more immigrants are the areas with fewer citizens, and the areas that thus have fewer votes to add to state political totals. Only 60,000 voices in a gubernatorial election, but 1 member of the state legislature. Go across town to Hollywood, Beverly Hills, and the Valley, and you see an area with very few immigrants and very few non-citizens, right? So this is one of the richer, whiter, and this is still a fairly liberal-ish area, but it was won by, somehow this erased this 2nd district, McIntosh's, but this district had, 5 minutes. So this district had 180,000 voters. Same number of residents, more than 3 times the number of voters. So this is an area that does just as well in legislative elections, but has 3 times as much representation in gubernatorial and direct democracy elections. Right? So this sort of clearly shows that the immigrant areas, while they may capture legislative seats, are at a disadvantage in the other constituency of California in U.S. politics because they have so few voters. All right. Finally, I want to talk about 3 potential research designs in areas where I think it would be fruitful to see further research. And the first one is about immigrant coalitions. So we often think about politics as just there's only this fight between whites and blacks, or whites and Latinos, or you know, whites and African immigrants, right? But Rafe Sonnenshine's work looking at LA mayoral coalitions and the recent work he's done with Mark Draisey show that often minorities groups, their chances of political success depend on the interethnic coalitions that they can build, right? And that those are sometimes affected by dense populations. So Rafe and Mark Draisey showed that in Los Angeles, blacks were less likely to vote for Latino mayoral candidates when they lived in areas with more black residents. So dense population segregation actually decreased the chances of interethnic coalitions. Right? So this deserves to be explored more in this role of geographic context that Jim Gipple talked about so much. Deserves to be explored more in a relationship not just between black and white voters or Latino and white voters, but the chances of interethnic coalitions. The chances of, particularly, say, in Detroit, where there's a long-standing black population and a recent Middle Eastern Muslim population. How does residential segregation play into the chances of political coalitions in that area? That's worth exploring. Second area that's worth exploring, I think, is the fact that there's some evidence that just, even if you're a minority group, being a majority within the majority party can lead to great political representation. So my dad's a historian who looks at voting rights, and he's found that the key to Latino representation in California is getting a large proportion of the Democratic primary electorate. Right? So Latinos don't need to be a majority in a district overall, but if they can be a majority of the Democrats, they can nominate the Democratic member and then gain that seat. Right? And then some of my colleagues at UCSD have shown that when you're in a legislature and when you're actually looking at voting, controlling the majority of the majority party, even if you're a minority overall, can still lead to great policy gains. You can still set the agenda for a legislature and use the control over what bills are heard in order to get your way politically. So one research design to look at this would be to compare Latino influence in a state like Colorado, a state where Democrats have recently become the majority, partly through having many Latinos in their coalition, to a state like Arizona, where there are also many Latinos, but their party that they're affiliated with, the Democratic Party, is in the minority in Arizona. So to what extent does the new capturing of the majority in Colorado benefit Latinos compared to what they get out of policy in Arizona? And then finally, residential stability, though it may create many social problems for a group, may make the conflicts across racial and ethnic groups lessen. So there's either intuition, and you see this in the way people talk about politics, that when political territory is contested by a new group moving in, you have lots of fights, but when the lines are solid and people aren't moving around, that there are often ways for, say, blacks to get along with Latinos. So in San Diego politics, there's one district that's primarily African American and a couple that are winnable for Latinos in the city council. And there was one Latino leader who was asked whether they're going to run someone in the 4th district of the city council, I think. And he said to the San Diego newspaper, said, no, that's the black district, so we're not going to run anyone there. Right? So this is sort of shocking, but it's also evidence, right, that when these political areas aren't contested, you can often have cooperation, and blacks and Latinos together vote in the same way in many citywide elections in San Diego. Now, that's changing in San Diego and in many areas of California as Latinos move into areas that were historically black. So it might be important to look at areas of political change, right? Areas areas of demographic change, and to see if that rapid demographic change means worse relationships between the old population living there and the new population. So you can do this by starting a survey either in 2 areas that are now similar but were different a few years ago, or starting a longitudinal study in areas that we know are going to experience demographic change, and ask voters about this. And you can't expect voters to sort of tell you explicitly about their chances of coalescing, but you could use survey experiments to, say, come up with a potential candidate, and ask some of the voters have that candidate with a Latino last name, some without a Latino last name, or use some other racial marker to examine the extent to which people are less likely to form coalitions when they've seen rapid change in their community. Thank you.